The first day I saw you since long ago, I still remember it was so cool. You were warm and I with some green tea. You asked me, can you lend me sugar? You grabbed the chicken bowl and shook her, and you put all the sugar.
Okay, so I'm kind of excited today because I haven't reviewed a monitor in a good while, I'll say. And I just pulled in that massive box you probably saw, and that is a massive 52-inch monitor from LG that I'm checking out today. And it's been a while since I've actually reviewed a monitor. Now, what's exciting about it is that despite me already having this incredible monitor, which I've been on for 2 years, this is my go-to 4K OLED from LG, and the fact that I'm excited for this one says something. Now, LG is sponsoring today's video, so I do want to give a huge thanks to them for allowing me to check this thing out a bit early, but there's a lot to unpack here, and I want to read the model name just so you guys know if you want to check out the spec sheet. It's the 52G930B. I will just call it the G9, so I don't butcher that every single time. But if you haven't heard of LG's Evo lineup, it's their pretty much ultra high-res gaming lineup of monitors, which are naturally pretty awesome when it comes down to gaming, but a whole lot of other things. As for what I'm using now, this is the LG 4K OLED 240 Hertz, which is 32 inches, which is great, mind you. 32 is pretty much the sweet spot for a lot of people, but sometimes you do need a little bit more space depending on the sort of game you're playing, what sort of productivity, editing, whatever you're doing. Sometimes you need a larger screen, and that's where something like this comes in. Now, despite my hype for this monitor, which is the one I keep personally coming back to, I also did check out LG's 5K 2K OLED monitor last year, which I'm actually going to compare these two 5K 2Ks in about a month or so. So keep an eye out for that one. But I'm stoked to check out this one. I haven't had a monitor this large ever, so it's going to be, hopefully it fits, which I think it will, but I'm going to get this thing set up to see, A, if it fits, and to get into some gaming, some media, and I kind of want to see how my editing timelines look on here. So I'm going to dive into that and check this thing out.
Would have you down with me, sugar girl? It's like a spell. I feel I float in caramel.
Oh.
Today's the 7th day since we first met, and I assure I won't forget. Sugar boy, you emptied over me.
Okay, so I've had this thing set up and I've been using it for the last couple days, and I might sound a little bit different because I'm sick as heck, meaning I've been putting some good time into actually using this monitor. And honestly, I can say I'm pleasantly surprised. This thing's kind of nuts in terms of not only, again, the spec sheet, but the resolution, the aspect ratio, the performance, and obviously the sheer size of it. And overall, I kind of think this thing actually looks pretty awesome in my setup, just in general. Granted, it is pretty big, so you're gonna need some space for this thing. I did have to sort of reroute my Mac Studio to the side here. My PlayStation is sort of off my desk shelf, but I think it's kind of worth it. Now, as mentioned, of course, this is a 52-inch 5K 2K monitor, which does go up to 240 Hertz at its native resolution of 5120 by 2160, which pretty much ends up giving you a PPI of 108. Now, where this comes into play in terms of that resolution, it's pretty much 4K wide. So just like you take a 3440 by 1440p sort of wide monitor, this is the same thing, but the 4K version pretty much. So you are getting that higher PPI and some solid fidelity on your games and media. Now, one thing I can say is I know OLED is all the rage for good reason. I love OLED panels, but one thing I can say, for a VA panel, this actually looks pretty darn good. Now, unless you're going with something like an OLED TV that's going to be, 55 inches, maybe you can get like a 43-inch OLED. Those don't really give you the same features that a monitor would have, such as the higher refresh rate, not to mention the DisplayPort 2.1. And this actually is a monitor in this larger size. So if you are really looking for that larger display, that is where something like this actually comes in. Plus, this obviously has that curve, which is going to come in clutch for a lot of gaming. Now, speaking of curve, as this monitor is as large as it is, you're definitely sort of leaning into this 1000R curve because it really does sort of wrap around your peripheral vision, and it's definitely a welcomed curve, especially if you're doing any sort of immersive type gaming. So it really does depend on what you're going to be playing. And to go further into the actual ports you have on here, it's actually pretty well equipped. You do get those two HDMI 2.1 ports. You have a DisplayPort 2.1 UHBR 13.5. And probably my favorite port here is gotta be the Type-C port, which is something I've been missing on my 4K OLED. So before I was sort of using a dock to give me that Type-C, which worked fine, but I always prefer having a Type-C port that's just direct for that display, and it does also charge up to 90 watts, which is almost a must-have, especially if you're using something like a Windows laptop. Those seem to just drain on battery like crazy, so it's a nice to have. Otherwise, if I'm working on a project where I'm actually taking it on the go, I do use my MacBook Air with this, which is also pretty awesome. Apart from that, you do have 2 USB-A ports, which works with the Type-C, and lastly, you do get that 4-pole DTS-X headphone jack, which is going to be good for any sort of speakers, media, IEMs, headphones, whatever, and I'll talk more about that when it comes down to media. As for the design and the build of this display, I'm just stoked LG sort of kept their more minimal design. It's not overly gamer-esque. They have the nice flat stand, which I've always preferred, versus the sort of prongs that a lot of monitors have. There's no overly crazy gamer aesthetic apart from some minor RGB on the back end, which is customizable. Now, you're not really going to see it all that much unless you're in a super dark room. It will illuminate on the back end, but you can just cycle colors or pick something you personally want. Beyond that, there's no overly the top branding apart from some minor LG Ultra Gear branding on the chin itself. And the display is pretty much almost edge to edge, really. As for the actual stand here, there is a decent amount of adjustability. You're not rotating a display this large, being completely real, but this does have left to right swivel. You do have a good amount of height adjustments, and there is a little bit of tilt as well, depending on how you like to position that. So adjustability is actually pretty decent. And again, that base stand, I'm just happy it's not overly large because I always have a desk shelf in my desk setup. So this actually fits on my desk shelf, which is one huge plus for me at least. But yeah, overall, it's actually pretty well built, and I would have just assumed that a monitor this large would almost be sort of floppy, but it's not. There's a little bit of a rock to it, but not necessarily floppy, which I can appreciate. Now, as for why this thing's a little bit more special is I'm coming from my 4K 240Hz OLED, which is my go-to, like I mentioned. And separately from that is the 5K 2K OLED version of this monitor from last year. And that one's a little bit smaller at 45 inches. And these two are gonna be some hot monitors to be sort of deciding between. But as for why this one sort of ends up having a little of that special space is, again, because you have that huge display, which isn't typically available on anything outside of the television space. So it does end up being rather versatile for the different things I personally do, like my accounting work for my day job, creation work, and of course the high refresh rate and response time make this excellent for gaming. Separately from that, when it comes down to regular monitors, like I mentioned, when you have something like the 3440 by 1440, those are actually technically vertically short. So when you're playing games like, for myself, noticeably much in Overwatch, those games actually cut off a little bit on the top side, and it does still sort of give you a wider view. But when you have something like this or that other 5K 2K I reviewed last year, these have that 4K height, so you're not actually losing any vertical pixels, which is huge, because a lot of games do cut that resolution off if you are going ultra wide. And I'll go a little bit more into this as well, but for people who typically like to run multiple monitors, this ends up being sort of a sweet spot, especially for a single monitor setup, because you can split this, and I had a good time splitting that between my Mac and my PlayStation, so I'll dive more into that as well. And for myself, if you didn't know already, I don't calibrate my displays or anything like that. I use them straight out of box, just because I consider myself more of a normie. I'm sure I could probably squeeze a better image out of every display I touch. I just personally don't care to. Now, this one here still has a peak SDR brightness of 400 nits, which is plenty bright for a lot of people. And this is also VESA HDR 600 certified, which I did edit this entire video, mind you, on this display. So if you're watching this, the whole thing was edited up on here. You'll actually see me editing this video in this video, the videoception, I guess. As for how I have everything in my setup, I'll start from left to right. I have my PlayStation 5, which is going to that first HDMI 2.1 port. I'm a huge console gamer. As much as I love my super beast PC gaming, console gaming is just more relaxing for me, so that's where I sort of gravitate to. And luckily, this monitor, despite being an ultra wide, actually still lets you play at 16:9. Pretty much a massive, I think it's a 43-inch 4K monitor, which is pretty sweet. So console gaming on here goes to my first HDMI 2.1 port. My second HDMI 2.1 port goes to my M3 Ultra Mac Studio, which is pretty much my workhorse. I'll probably never have to replace this thing, and that is where I do all of my content creation for the most part. If I'm doing vertical content, maybe once in a while I'll flip on to something like an iPad, because it's just, you know, quick turnaround. But that system is awesome. And yes, I actually do game a little bit of World of Warcraft on that system. For the most part though, when it comes down to gaming, I am using my RTX 4090 PC, which is an Alienware pre-built, and that is going through the DisplayPort 2.1 with UHBR 13.5. And that thing is honestly still a super powerhouse, and I can't imagine having to actually replace that system either over the next while. And primarily before sort of using my consoles a lot more, I was just a PC gamer, so I'm stoked that HDMI 2.1 and the PS5 Pro and the Xbox Series X give you those features like auto low latency mode and VRR, which again are compatible on this display, and I'll sort of go more into that. But that's sort of what I have on here. And that last thing, the Type-C port, again, I'm using that with either my work laptop for the day job or my MacBook Air. Otherwise, I actually just use it for charging a lot of my tech if I have, my dumb phone or my headset, whatever it is, I'll actually just use it for charging, which is pretty sweet. Otherwise, that last port, the DTSX headphone jack, I actually just use with my IEMs, and I don't really unplug those. I just sort of tuck them back here, out of sight, out of mind, and then I just swap the input when I need to use them, and they actually sound pretty excellent. Now, talking more about gaming, since this is an Ultra Gear display, it is primarily meant for gaming, and for a lot of people, this thing is completely bonkers, and for some people, it might also be the end game in terms of monitors. Now, as for how I particularly game, it's going to be a good mix of RPGs, MMOs, and third and first person shooters. And seemingly somehow, at least once a year, I get back into flipping World of Warcraft, where I play it casually. I don't want to play it casually, but I do anyways because I'm living that dad life. But I love World of Warcraft, especially on ultra-wide displays. I don't know, it's just one of those games I always come back to every now and then with the new expansions. So I have been enjoying a good amount of time on this display for a while. And as for how this thing actually runs overall, it's pretty crazy because it is, again, going up to 240 hertz. And while I'm no super villain or anime protagonist, this does have a 1 millisecond response time. Whether or not I'm personally going to notice that, again, I don't really measure those things, but I haven't noticed any sort of issues. Everything feels insanely fast with my experience actually gaming on it. And the one thing I do want to point out, especially in games like World of Warcraft, or I guess, honestly, my favorite game of all time, it might be my #1 game, Red Dead Redemption 2, you really get to enjoy that 1000 arc curve. I imagine that's going to be more useful for a lot of racing sim people and stuff. I actually don't play almost any racing games at all, any car games whatsoever. And considering the size of this thing, it's nice to not just crane my neck left and right whenever I'm using this thing. So it's almost to the point where that 1000 arc curve is almost mandatory to have if you just want to see. And again, because of the resolution of the display, you're not losing any of that verticality in some of these games like Overwatch. Naturally as well, it is going to be different from game to game because I actually find Marvel Rivals seems to handle this resolution ultra wide a little bit better than Overwatch. It could be optimization, it could be how the game was made, it could just be third person versus first person. But again, it's going to be dependent on the game, but I still think it looks pretty awesome. And again, even when hopping into something a little bit more chill, like my Red Dead Redemption 2, it really is a massive 5K, 2K immersive display, so it's hard not to love it. Likewise, depending on your hardware as well, you will have AMD FreeSync Premium here. So if you are running an AMD GPU, you're not going to notice any sort of screen tearing, so all your frames are going to be synced up, which is pretty sweet. Likewise, that AMD FreeSync Premium pairs perfectly with my Xbox Series X and my PlayStation 5 Pro, because naturally those are AMD systems. Speaking of which, one of the things I still love about this thing is that a lot of older ultra-wide monitors didn't let you sort of force a 16:9 aspect ratio, and I sort of mentioned it before, but my consoles, they don't do ultra-wide. I wish they did, they just don't. They're not built to. I'm sure they could, they just don't. But I can use this as a sort of massive 43-inch 4K display, and I can just force my 16:9 aspect ratio. Likewise as well, if you don't want it to be 43 inches massive, you can actually resize the window through the console itself. A lot of people don't know that, so it is a bit handy if you are using a massive system. So if you are somebody like myself who does love your PC gaming, but you also love console gaming, not all hope is lost using an ultra-wide. Always be sure to hop into your settings to check that out. Now still, this monitor is going to be a bonkers 240 hertz, but the consoles still will only cap at 120. That's just how they're built. But they still have those features that were PC only previously, and that's going to be auto low latency mode and variable refresh rate, and that sort of smooths out the experience a lot. For myself right now, I actually just hop into a lot of Spider-Man 2. I beat that game like 3 times. My kids love watching me play Spider-Man 2. And the actual game I'm working through personally is Expedition 33. And of course, it looks amazing. And one thing as well, notably I can say, is that some way, somehow, consoles, and I've mentioned this in pretty much every video I talk about monitors, consoles seem to handle HDR better. I don't know what it is. Probably because I don't calibrate my displays, but I think it's something to do with Windows HDR just simply isn't as good as console HDR. But this actually looks pretty good in the HDR profile, so I appreciate that it's available on my system as well. But yeah, for myself this year, I've had a healthy mix of console and PC gaming since I truly love them both, and this monitor can provide a solid experience for either of those, which I can appreciate. That's just been my goal for this year, is to sort of taper back the amount of work I'm doing and legitimately just play more video games without making videos about playing video games. Imagine that. Technically, in that specific 16:9 aspect ratio, this might be the largest 4K monitor I've ever used. Now, with all this screen estate, I have to quickly talk about picture by picture and picture in picture, which are two massive features that a lot of people are, I'd imagine, will probably be using on a display like this. Again, because you have so much screen to work with, you can actually split two inputs. You can either have them side by side, which is awesome. That's what I like to do on here, or you can toss one of your inputs into sort of a little box on the side, which is also pretty useful. For myself, I did test this out between all my inputs. So I had DisplayPort with my PlayStation with my Mac, DisplayPort and Mac. You can sort of mix and match them and swap the audio sources between them, which is pretty sweet. The cheat code here, let me just get it real quick. I think the cheat code here is probably going to be finding a headset that has a dual connection. A lot of headsets now allow you to connect to two sources at once. That is a cheat hack if you're going to be using picture by picture. Otherwise, it works really well. And the thing about this is that you end up having two large monitors. So it's pretty much 1440p, but it's taller because of this, you know, like I mentioned how it's a taller resolution. You end up having a 2560 by 2160 resolution on both displays, so still a lot of screen even if you're splitting it. And again, it just ends up being a solid option here because the speakers on here are actually still pretty sweet even if you're swapping them between sources. And naturally as well, talking about the speakers, when it comes down to any sort of media and stuff, this is still great for media. Whether you are going to be watching any sort of ultra wide content, which does exist for a lot of my cinema buffs out there. Otherwise, it's just a nice large display. And I've been watching a lot of anime over the last year and a half. I got into anime because of you guys in the comment section. I've talked about this a lot. I seriously just want to say thank you guys, because some of the best media I've ever watched has actually been animes in the last year and a half. So I started My Hero Academia, and I've been actually pumping a lot of episodes throughout monitors, and that is an excellent show. So thank you guys. But those speakers, again, these are some down-firing speakers. And I don't think I've had to pump them beyond like 30 while listening to or playing anything, because it just gets plenty loud. Are they going to beat a dedicated set of speakers? Probably not. That's what the DTS:X headphone jack is for, if you do need to put in a set of speakers. But if you're like me and you don't really like having extra sets of anything in your desk setup, not that I personally have much space here, I just like having a built-in set of speakers. That's actually a big reason why I keep going back to my 4K 240Hz OLED, is because that has, I think, the best set of built-in speakers on any monitor I've ever used. So I'm just happy that these still have a decent set. And again, if you're not using speakers, that same DTS:X headphone jack is good for, again, IEMs that I like to use. It's easy to forget how good audio sounds when you actually just plug it in directly. I'm so used to everything wireless, my AirPods, my headsets, but when you plug it in, man, does it sound good. Now, apart from the gaming and the media and the shows and stuff, when I do want to get a little bit more productive, again, I run my channel through this setup here. So I've done a good chunk of editing. Again, this entire video was edited on this monitor, as well as my day job where I do a lot of accounting work. So if you are a typist, whatever the case is, this does have a PPI of 108. It is a bit of a larger display, of course. I find 107 is actually pretty decent. Anything above 100 is good for me. And I haven't had any issues with any sort of text sharpness and stuff. Likewise as well, because this thing is so huge, my editing timelines, I can pretty much span my entire timeline across this while editing, which is pretty awesome. And then just the general screen estate is very usable. So whenever I'm doing my accounting work, I'll have usually 4 windows split across, and I don't have to crop or scale anything wildly because I just have a lot of screen to work with. And while I'm no professional colorist, I do still color grade all my videos. This does have DCI P3, 95% coverage for the color gamut. So you can still technically color grade on here if you want to. And again, I am no professional and all of my workflows are SDR, but if you are going to be pumping out some HDR content, VESA HDR 600 is the bare minimum you're going to want to use for any sort of HDR workflows. So I'm still happy to see that on a VA panel. Likewise as well, depending on your space, this does have an anti-glare coating. So I have this massive light bar up here. It's very well diffused. I use that to light myself for my videos. Otherwise it lights my desk up and I don't even notice it on the display when I'm using my light bar. Otherwise, nobody's really doing this, if I'm completely honest, but I take my flashlight and I'm doing my whole test on here. Nobody's really doing that, but it does diffuse the light pretty well. Otherwise, I have all these lights around my area that are blasting the screen, and I don't have any personal issues with it. But the more you can control your lighting, the better. Now, overall, I can say with that, this is probably one of the craziest displays I've ever seen. It's very unique. I know OLED is all the rage, so I will be testing this against the OLED counterpart next month, and I want to see sort of the main differences. So you're sort of trading off OLED for a larger display. Some people just want a larger display, but they don't want a TV because TVs are sort of missing some features that a monitor might have. So I can see where this thing fits in the whole lineup. LG has some pretty rad monitors out right now, and I'm hoping to check them out. I'm a bit of an OLED fanboy, so I'm looking forward to having these side to side. But yeah, just if I'm focusing on this one, it's going to give you that same sort of fidelity as 4K. It's wide, it's huge. It does everything that you might need it to do between console gaming, PC gaming, creation work, any sort of productivity. And I just dig that something like this exists. But yeah, if you guys have any questions about this thing, please leave them down below in the comment section. I will be answering those the best I can over the next week and a bit. And if you do want to check it out, of course, this will be linked. And another huge thanks to LG for sponsoring today's video. I'm actually probably going to keep this in my setup for the next while either way, regardless, because I kind of dig it. But yeah, I appreciate you guys watching till the end. Till next time.